Good morning and welcome. Well, good morning. Yeah. Thank you for the invite here. I have never been to Barbados before, so this is quite exciting for me. All of my colleagues back in London were very jealous. My colleague Andy, who edits our daily bulletin, insisted that I should have said that I needed an assistant to do this session, but I said I think that was pushing my luck. I don't really need an assistant, so it's very exciting to be here. As we said in the introduction, I am going to be talking to you for most of today, so hopefully I can tell you what I know about the music industry for the first day and a half, and then I can learn for a day and a half, and I look forward to sort of discussing with you guys about this industry, as in the music industry here in Barbados and in the Caribbean in general, and finding out about what you are doing now, what you want to achieve, and perhaps where you see that heading. As has already been said, this is me. My name is chriscooke.com. You can just about see my name for certain there. You might not see that my name is. That's my website. And as has been said, I am the MD of a UK-based business called CompleteMusicUpdate.com. We're going to talk a lot today about pushing your brand and making sure people know where to connect with you online. So this is me practicing what I preach. So CMU, as I say, we're a UK-based company. There are 3 different sides to what we do. We're best known in the UK and Europe for our news services. So we cover the music business and indeed music. Okay, so what's happening in the world of music and the music business. For online predominantly, we have a daily email bulletin that goes out every day, late morning in the UK. We also have a podcast, which you can tune into every Friday. This week's podcast is a pre-record, as you might imagine, because I'm here not recording the podcast. And we also have a news digest service, and we have a thing called CMU Trends, which is perhaps most relevant today, which is where we dissect what's happening in the music industry and the key trends and try to explain what's going on. I think sometimes in the music business there's little stats and cliches that we like to use, but I think a lot of people in the music business, and this is worldwide, because a lot of people get into the music business almost by mistake, okay? Because they want to be a musician, or they want to write and perform music, or because they like music and they want to work in music, and somehow they get themselves into a job at a label or a promoter, and they've got the dream job working in music. But that doesn't necessarily mean that people know much about the business side of music, and particularly the copyright side. I mean, at the heart of the music industry is intellectual property, is copyright. We have the lawyers, okay? Every music company has a lawyer who knows about copyright, but really everybody in the music industry should know the basics about what copyright is, why it exists, and how it works. And I think in the music industry, there's a lot of head nodding goes on. And I'm talking here about Sony, Universal, Warner, all over the world. People will say things like, oh, we're having a little bit of problem with the mechanical licensing on that record. And everyone in the room goes, oh, yes, mechanical licensing problems. And no one knows what that means. Okay, no one's got any idea what that means. And there's a fear almost in the room for someone, particularly a junior person, to say, what does that mean? I think because everyone's got their dream job. When you work in music, you're doing your dream job. So you don't want to admit that you don't know what's going on because you fear you might lose the dream job. So one of the things that we do at CMU is to try and explain what's going on, both in basic terms, but then of course also this is an industry in flux. And in some ways that's what's exciting about the music industry. And I think it's particularly exciting for markets like this, because 15 years ago, the music industry was dominated by 5 countries who pumped out most of the global content. And in those 5 countries, there were 4 or 5 big companies on the IP, on the intellectual property side, and 2 or 3 big companies on the live side that basically had the market sewn up. In order to reach the market, you either had to have, well, you needed both. You needed media to champion you, and there weren't many media. And you needed retailers to stock your music, and there weren't many retailers. And those big players in music I just mentioned had the money that meant that they got priority treatment by the media and by the retailers. So they always had an advantage. What happened 15 years ago is all of that fell down. And in some ways that's incredibly exciting because everybody is facing the same challenges. And what the web and the rise of digital and subsequently of smartphones and portable devices have done is it has put huge pressure on this industry. But the industry is working out its future, and if you are entrepreneurial, it's very exciting because there are new opportunities out there. We do work for a company called IE Music in London. They're a management company. They're best known for managing Robbie Williams worldwide, and it's run by a guy called Tim, who used to run Island Records way back. Tim in the 60s, early 70s. So when Ireland was first starting to go from being a small little label, of course born out of championing the music of Jamaica and becoming a big global player, he was overseeing running that. And he says that the best time to work in the music industry was in the 60s, because nobody knew what they were doing. Nobody knew what they were doing. And that was exciting, because it meant you could make it up as you go along. And then through the 70s and the 80s, it all got formalized, the big companies got their power, and everything ran to a system. And then what happened 10, 15 years ago, as I say, that fell down. And so actually now is the most exciting time to working in music. Because again, nobody knows what they're doing. And therefore, everybody's making it up as they go along, and that's exciting. Anyway, so it's a very long-winded way of introducing myself. As well as our media, we also have CMU DIY, which is our education program. So back in the UK, we work with young artists and people who want to work in the industry. And then the reason I am here is because of our consultancy business. So CMU Insights, we provide training and consultancy to music companies and companies who work with music. So in the UK, we have our own seminars program and masterclass program. We also do in-house training for companies like Sony Music and IE Music, who I've already mentioned. We try and help the music industry at entry level all the way up to the top to understand how the music industry works, the business side of making music. I'm not here today to tell you how to write songs, because I don't know how to write songs. And I'm not here today to tell you how to play the music and perform the music. I'm assuming you've got that covered, because I can't help you with that. What I can help you with is, once you've got great songs and great performances and great recordings of those great performances of great songs, I can help you work out how you might then build a business around that and generate revenue from what you do. First of all, before lunch, I'm going to be talking to you about making money from music. So basically, that's a beginner's guide to how artists and their business partners generate revenue out of their songs and their recordings and their performances. For some of you, quite a lot of that will be familiar. Also, I'm taking a sort of a global perspective here, so we'll have a look at what the music industry in, say, the US or the UK or the big European markets look like, and then before lunch, you can then feed back to me on how that compares with the music industry here, and where you have music companies that do exist in this region and where there are gaps in the local music industry. Then we'll have lunch. After lunch, it's all copyright, okay? So I'm going to explain to you how copyright works. David mentioned at the introduction, I wrote a report last year called Dissecting the Digital Dollar. This was commissioned by the Music Managers Forum in the UK, and the reason they asked me to write that report is the managers in the UK are increasingly having to sit down with their artists and explain all the money that is coming in from a Spotify type service or an Apple Music type service or a Pandora type service. And what the managers realized is they have no idea how the licensing of those services works, because they never used to know. I mean, it was quite easy to get your head around. You press CDs, you sell them to a record shop, the record shop keeps 30% of the money, you pay 10% of the money to the publisher, and you keep what's left. Okay, that's quite easy to get your head around. Whereas the way the digital music services are licensed is quite complicated. And so the Dissecting the Digital Dollar report basically is a beginner's guide to copyright, which then explains how the digital services are licensed and why, and crucially, what happens to the money as it flows through the system. And then it raises 8 issues with the way digital music currently works. We're, as we speak, writing part 2 of that report, which will then be going into each of those issues in turn and making some proposals about what we might do. But you can read the report, it's free, we'll send you a link to where you can download it, but I will give you the basics this afternoon. I'm going to explain to you how copyright works worldwide. I have read the Copyright Act of Barbados, which I hadn't read until 3 weeks ago. Fortunately, Barbados copyright law is very similar to English copyright law, but with some interesting differences. So I'll give you a quick overview of how music rights work, and we'll talk a little bit about collective licensing, obviously very relevant to today because we've got all the various collecting societies of the regions represented. Then, to wrap up today, I'm going to talk about deals and management, the different deals that artists do. Some are on an informal basis, some on a very formal basis. And I'm going to look in particular at 3 deals: the record deal, the publishing deal, and then the management deal. And I think one of the themes that we'll be talking about over the next day or so is the increased importance of artist management. Now, I work for the Music Managers Forum in the UK, but that's not why I'm saying that. I've been saying this for the last 15 years as someone who's been writing about the music industry since the late 90s, that the role of the artist manager is becoming ever more important, which is a challenge, especially for those markets where artist management has been almost non-existent to date. So who is going to do this ever-increasingly important job of management? Even in places like the UK and the US, where there is a big established management community, there's still a question: are there enough managers to go around, given that the manager is now so important? In other markets like this one, where artist management is probably the least established part of the business, well, that's a challenge, and that's something we might talk about over the next day or so. Tomorrow, I'm going to come back and talk to you about the digital market, so a little bit about how things are working globally. You can tell me what digital services are available in this region and which ones are gaining traction. I can tell you which digital services are generating the most, well, which have the most users and which generate the most money. Okay, they're not necessarily the same thing. So we'll talk about the impact of a YouTube and a Spotify and a Pandora and an iTunes, Apple Music tomorrow. I'll also very quickly run you through the basics of the Dissecting the Digital Dollar report on how those services are licensed. And then I'm going to finish off by talking a little bit about evolving your business, both from the perspective of everybody in music all over the world are having to evolve their businesses. And we'll have a look at how artist businesses are evolving. And then we can talk a little bit about how you might go about evolving your businesses, whether you're coming at it from an artist perspective or from a label publisher perspective, what you could be doing to evolve your businesses, and what you could be doing as a community to evolve not just your personal business, but the business of the area, the Barbados music industry, the Caribbean music industry. And that will then lead into the discussions that are going to follow on the rest of Thursday and Friday on how you build a brand, how you connect online, and how you go about planning your business and working with each other. This first session, making money from music, so I'm going to talk about 5 different things between now and lunch. So I'm going to start off very quickly by even challenging the entire proposition of the next 3 days, which is why. Why make money out of music? It's sort of stating the obvious, but sometimes it's worth reminding ourselves why the music business even exists to start with. So let's start off with this first crucial question, which we have to answer correctly, otherwise it renders the entire day redundant, which is: why are we insisting on making money out of music? Why can we not just enjoy the songs and the performances for their, the cultural value that they bring us as a society? And as I say, in many ways, I'm now going to state the obvious. But if artists want to give up the day job and focus on their music full time, and I do a lot of training with very young artists back in the UK, and when you say, who in here would like to give up the day job, stop working in a call center or in a shop or in a restaurant and actually do music full time, nearly everybody puts their hand up. And so if artists want to focus on their music full time, and indeed if they want to take their music to as wide a possible audience as possible, then they're going to need to make money. For starters, they need money to live off. Okay, so it's straightforward, really simple. Okay, if you're going to be a full-time musician, you need to make enough money to live off. Now, a lot of musicians actually have multiple elements to their career, and some of you said that as we went around the room. There's an expression people have started using in the UK, which I can't quite decide whether or not I like it, which is portfolio career. Okay, and it's a term to communicate that a lot of musicians, they perform in their own right, but they also do session work, they also probably teach, they might also do a bit of music PR on the side, and across those different pursuits, they bring in enough money to live off. But obviously, most artists would like to bring in a full-time, decent income simply through their songs and their recording and their performance. But beyond paying the artist, and of course there's also the thing there, some basic maths, there's no secret that most of the big success stories in music worldwide in the last 5 years have been singer-songwriters, because singer-songwriters are a lot cheaper to run than 5-piece bands. Okay, so obviously if you have a group with lots of people in it, then every time you add a member, the costs of running that operation go up. The downside of being a singer-songwriter is you might need a band behind you when you perform, and then actually that makes performing live very expensive. But if you are a singer-songwriter, it's you and a guitar or a piano or whatever, then you have the easiest task in building a business. Beyond paying yourself, there are then other costs involved in making music. So the cost of touring. And I think a lot of newspapers around the world, as we know, the record industry went through a very difficult decade between 2000 and 2010, which is something we'll talk about a lot over the next day or so. The live music has boomed worldwide in the 10 years that the record industry went down. Okay, so the people who put on shows and festivals and run venues had a very good decade between 2000 and 2010. When the record industry was in very steep decline. And so a lot of articles you read these days say, oh, artists make all their money live these days. It doesn't matter if we don't sell records anymore. It doesn't matter if people pirate our music or they watch all of our music on a YouTube platform where the royalties are very low, because artists make all their money playing live. And I think for new artists, that's a very depressing thing to read, because most new artists lose money playing live. And so live's a very top-heavy industry. Once you reach a certain level, live will bring in a lot of money. And if you reach arena level, certainly multiple territory, a phenomenal amount of money. Get to stadium level, quids in. And for most established artists, live is their single biggest revenue stream. There are two reasons for that. A, economies of scale. Once you're playing massive venues, you make a lot of money. There's also the issue, and we'll come back to this when we talk about deals later, that if you're an established artist and you have a record deal and a publishing deal and a live deal with a promoter, generally the way music industry deals go is that the record deal is totally stacked in the label's favour. The label keeps most of the money. Publishing, normally the starting point is 50-50. If anything, the songwriter sees more than the publisher. Live, the majority of the money goes to the artist. So one of the reasons why established artists make more out of live is because they're getting the vast majority of that money, whereas with their record sales, obviously every record deal is different, but certainly for a major label deal, then the label is keeping the majority of the money. Once you get to a certain level, live probably will be how you as an artist make most money. But at the outset, actually, there's a cost to touring. And obviously, playing hometown is one thing. The minute you go beyond hometown, costs start to rise. And even in the European markets, where you can drive or get a train to different cities, there's still quite a considerable cost. And obviously, for you guys to be flying around the region, quite quickly it gets quite expensive. So actually, at the outset, most artists lose money when they play live. So you might say, well, why play live? The answer to that is, live is how you build fan base. And a lot of the theme of the next 3 days is, as a new artist, if you want a business, you have to build a fan base. Because without a fan base, you don't have a business. How do you build a fan base? Well, we'll talk about the different social channels and the direct-to-fan channels, mainly on Friday, that you can be using. However, if you have no fans, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter can't help you. You've got to have that initial infused fan base that you can then use the digital channels to then reach out. How do you get that initial fan base? You play brilliant shows and you take the people with you. So you have to gig to build fan base. So at the outset, actually playing live is often a cost rather than income. Then there's the cost of producing music. Now, obviously, we live in an era where this laptop is a recording studio. Okay, so that's a lot cheaper than 20 years ago, when sending someone into a recording studio was very expensive. That said, although some artists can produce great music on their own on a laptop, generally music making is a collaborative process. Most of the best songs and recordings that we love were not one person. Okay, they were a multitude of people. They were session musicians, other songwriters, producers, engineers, other people in the studio on the day that made it the best recording ever. So music making is still mainly a collaborative process, and so you need that support, the songwriters and the engineers and the producers, to make sure you get the best possible recording. So there is still a cost to producing music, even if it's a lot less than it used to be. There's the cost of getting your music around the world. Again, this is another cost that has come down a lot in the last 15 years. It's a lot cheaper to get your music into Apple Music and iTunes than it is to get a CD into record shops all over the world. Having said that, it's not free. Okay, there is a cost to digital distribution. A, you will need a distributor who will charge a commission, and B, time. Okay, there's quite a lot of time in uploading the content, doing the metadata, getting the royalty statements, checking the royalty statements are right, and time is money. Okay, so again, A lot lower cost than it used to be, but still a cost. And then there's marketing. And again, you could say, well, marketing, surely that's cheaper today than it used to be because YouTube is free, and SoundCloud is free, and Facebook is free, and Instagram is free. And yes, they are. But there's two things to bear in mind. A, the platforms may be free to use, but using them well is time-consuming, and time is money. Okay, and so they're not free because you've got to invest time to do that stuff properly. There's also the issue that every single artist in the world has a YouTube, a SoundCloud, a Facebook, a Twitter, and an Instagram. So by having those 5 things, you're at point zero. You have no advantage over any other artist. You're just on a level playing field with every other artist in the world. And there are more artists trying to make it as musicians today than at any point in human history. So actually, it is as hard, if not harder, to stand out. And so we still need to invest time in building a story, getting that story out there, and marketing. And it is still true, certainly in the big North American and European markets, that if you have money and you can buy advertising, it still works. It shouldn't. In the social media age, how does having an advertising budget give you an edge? But it does. Okay, so there is a cost to marketing. That doesn't mean you have to have that. You can do it with great stories, great social, great imagery, and building a personality online. But marketing remains a challenge, and it remains a cost. And of course, we need to pay people to manage all of this. So quite quickly, if you want to go full-time with your music, you're going to need to bring in revenue. So that is why we are here. Okay, that is why the music business exists. Music, we know what that is. Business is making money. And so the music business exists to help artists turn what they already do into revenue. And in terms of how we make money out of music, well, there's lots of ways we make money out of music, but really there are 3 ways that we make money out of music. And so I split music revenues up into these 3 groups: intellectual property, live performance, and the fan relationship. Okay, so we either create and exploit intellectual property, or we stage and monetize live performance, or we create a fan relationship and then we monetize that relationship. It's always at events like this, particularly with lots of artists and songwriters in the room, I start using words like exploit and monetize, and I start telling songwriters that they are content generators. I know these are all terms some of you will be uncomfortable with. I'm using them in a positive way rather than a negative way. So let's quickly talk through each of these different revenue streams in turn. And intellectual property is the hardest to get your head around. It's why we're going to spend 2 hours talking about just that revenue stream later. It's a lot easier to talk about live performance. Fan relationship is a lot newer. But let's talk about IP first. And I suppose the thing to say, and this is what we're going to talk about this afternoon, is there are a number of different kinds of intellectual property that artists create. Okay? It's predominantly copyright. So there are 4 kinds of intellectual property: copyright, trademarks, patents, designs. Okay, so that's how the legal profession split up intellectual property. In the music industry, we are predominantly interested in copyright. Okay, and there is copyright in various things, and this is what we're going to talk about this afternoon. But crucially, there is copyright in songs. So who's a songwriter? Okay, many congratulations, you are copyright owners, okay? Because the minute you wrote a song, you created a copyright. There is copyright in that song. Technically, there are 2 copyrights, one in the words and one in the music, assuming there are lyrics. So you are now a copyright owner, okay? And copyright brings certain controls over the song that you have written, and we'll talk about that and how you monetize that later. There is then copyright in recordings. Who here has recorded some music? Okay, I don't want to put my hand up, I haven't. Okay. You're copyright owners, because the minute you create a recording, a copyright exists in the recording. And sort of, you know, the classic thing to remember about music rights is 2 sets of music rights: copyright in songs, copyright in recordings, and they are separate. So if you have made a recording of somebody else's song, you don't own the copyright in the song because you didn't write it. But you do own the copyright in the recording, because you made the recording of the song. It does mean that if you monetize that recording, you've then got to share the money with whoever wrote the song. And you need to make sure you have the relevant license in place to allow you to do that legally. But the crucial point is 2 separate copyrights: copyright in songs, copyright in recordings. Yes?
Let's say you have an unofficial contract with somebody, person who produces a record. I bring a record, I bring a song, he does this. Do those properties hold when you do online and retail? How does that play? Or the person who owns the master will receive all revenue generated?
Do you mean that if you've made the recording of someone else's song and then it gets streamed on Apple, is what happens to the money?
How does that get cut up now?
With digital, usually, there are a couple of exceptions, but usually with digital, it happens at the digital platform. So Apple sort it out. Whereas if you were to put out a CD, you have to sort it out. Okay, so if you put out a CD and it's not your song, you have to go and get a license from the publisher and pay the publisher some money. You can usually do that through the collecting society. With digital, a couple of exceptions, but in the main, with digital, the digital platform sorts out the publishing money. So the money that you receive from Apple, say, is yours to keep as the recording owner. They've already taken some of the money out to pay it to the publisher. Okay.
So in terms of, let's say I receive what they send me now. How am I fair to the people who play the part?
Oh, well, we'll come to that when we talk about, yes, so if you hold that thought, so the question there is, okay, the money's come in, it's your recording, how do you share that with the artists you collaborated with?
Because I can lie and just say, well, I didn't make no money, and just keep it.
Yeah.
But then in terms of fostering good relationships, we still have to try and find out how we split this money.
And I mean, the legal answer to that is it's up to you. Okay, and so good practice.
Up to me if I'm the master rights owner, or if I'm sharing this master. Let's say me and the producer say, well, we'll split 50-50 because I brought the lyrics,
correct,
you brought the music.
Correct.
So what I make, is it split 50-50, and then what about the session musicians that play on this record?
Whenever you create a copyright, whether it's a song or a recording, if you collaborate, then the collaborators need to have a conversation. And so if three people write a song, they have to decide how are we splitting the copyright. So, if some artists make a recording, they have to decide how are we splitting the copyright.
Okay.
And then you write that down, it's an agreement, and then if there's a dispute and it goes to court, the court would enforce the agreement.
Right, even if it's an official thing that we write down on paper.
Yeah, so two things. So A, we'll get into this more when we talk about copyright this afternoon, but B, I think the basic answer to what you're saying is it's for the collaborators to decide. So you and I mean it's if you talk to songwriters in particular, because songwriting is very often collaborative. So a lot of songs, 2 or 3 people collaborate, and all songwriters hate that moment when the song's written where they have to sit down and say, right, how are we splitting up the copyright? There's 3 of us. We're doing it 3 ways, or are we going to say, well, actually, you brought in most of the song written and we just added some lyrics, so you have 60, and it's for the songwriters to decide. Now, if the songwriter has a publisher, the publisher might say, I'm going to have this conversation. And some songwriters are quite happy to give that conversation up. One of the problems we have is, A, songwriters have to agree. They also have to then log that information with their collecting society. And one of the problems we have in the music industry today is we've not done a very good job of logging all that information. And so it can be hard to know how it is split. So, there is copyright in songs and copyright in recording, okay? And we'll go back into, if any of the conversation we've just had didn't make sense to you, don't worry, I'm going to go back through that and some more information this afternoon. As I was about to go on to, there's also copyright in anything visual. Okay, so there is copyright in art, there is copyright in photography, there is copyright in graphic design. And so, of course, the music industry has always created visual content as well as audio content. And traditionally in the music industry, we gave that away. Okay, we used the photography and the design for packaging. And we used it for marketing. And people had that for free. And then we tried to then monetize the songs and the recordings. What we are starting to see, actually, for some music companies, is that perhaps the photography and the artwork is as valuable as the songs and the recordings. And so rather than just giving all of that away, why don't we try and build products around our artwork? And we know that the merchandise side of the music industry has been through a period of growth in the last 10, 15 years. It varies between genre and artist to artist. And some artists have really gone for the merchandise part of their business. Others, it's sort of something on the side. They print up some t-shirts. Oh, that's very noisy, isn't it? They print up some T-shirts, they maybe have some badges, but they haven't gone fully into the merch side. But merch is a huge opportunity. And merch is easier today than it used to be, partly because you can now sell direct to your fans through your website, so you're no longer reliant on retailers to sell that product. So beyond the merch stall at the gig, you can sell directly to artists through your website. Also, the cost of producing merch has come down quite a lot. In particular, it used to be, for example, if you were pressing up T-shirts, that unless you printed up 500, there was no point doing it. Whereas now, you can do T-shirt printing on demand. There are websites where you upload your artwork, you put some information in, you put that onto your website, and actually there is no cost until somebody buys the T-shirt. And so there are no upfront costs for you. And there's various different platforms that can help you with that kind of merchandise. So the cost of producing merch has come down, the logistics of getting the merch to people, obviously there's still the fulfillment. If your fans are worldwide, you've got to mail out all this stuff. But it is easier today to make money out of merch than it used to be. And the crucial point is, merch is part of the intellectual property strand of the music industry because it is exploiting our visual copyrights, the copyright in artwork and photography and graphic design. Quick question here.
So as artists, you know, like, you normally hire somebody sometimes to do your artwork.
You do.
So I'm just wondering, when you sell your merchandise and everything, the artists who did your artwork, are they supposed to be paid for their...
Basically, I'm going to give you the same answer I gave here, which is that's for you to agree.
We discussed that.
Yeah. No, but crucially, when you hire a photographer or you hire a designer, you need to have a conversation. Who owns the intellectual property we're creating here? And it depends. Some photographers will be like, well, if you pay me a bit of money, you have the copyright. Other photographers, established photographers for certain, will say, well, I'm not going to give you the copyright, certainly unless you're going to pay me a lot of money, which presumably you're not. However, I'll give you a license. So you can use the photography whatever you like, but I have to get X of any money that you generate. And as I say, copyright law doesn't force any of this onto you, but it's for you to agree. So whenever you create a copyright, you have to have the conversation. Who owns this copyright? And who can do what with this copyright? And it's always better to have those conversations when the copyright is worthless than it is to have those conversations when the copyright is worth $1 million. Because at that point it becomes messy. And nobody likes having those conversations about how we're going to split things up. Some artists famously just had an agreement from the start, which is whenever we go in the studio, I mean, bands like Queen famously, from their start, it was like, whatever happens, everything's split 4 ways. So we don't have to have this conversation anymore. We've agreed. Even though some of those songs, Freddie Mercury wrote them outright. But they just agreed. We'll split everything 4 ways. But that's for you to decide as creators creating copyright. So, 3 sets of copyright that you can monetize, which is the copyright in songs, the copyright in recordings, and the copyright in your visuals, in photography and artwork. One last bit of intellectual property before we move on, which is trademarks. Now, trademark is a separate branch of intellectual property. But the music industry is increasingly in the trademark business too. So you can trademark your name, and in most countries you can also trademark your logo, and sometimes you can trademark slogans as well. So trademark is a different branch of IP law, and for some artists, actually, the trademark part of their business is now the biggest part of their business. Oh, go and grab the mic.
I just wanted to ask a question because I had trademarked a business name here, but I just wanted to know, is there a way, okay, there has to be trademark locally, and then it may be trademark regionally wherever you are, and then internationally. So if let's say, for example, I try to trademark a name here, will that be applicable for
no.
international?
So, good question. The big difference, copyright, well, 2 big differences between trademark and copyright. Difference 1 is in most countries, the US has a slight exception here, but in most countries, copyright is automatic. The minute you write the song, copyright exists. The minute you make a recording, copyright exists. You don't have to register it with anybody. Trademarks, you register. To get trademark protection, you have to go to a trademark registry and claim the name. And every trademark registry has their own rules and regulations. You won't be able to claim it beyond the country where the registry is based. And crucially, normally a registry will say, what do you want the trademark in? I want it in music. Okay, you have it in music. That doesn't mean you have rights to that name in retail or in travel. Okay, you have to say which sectors you want the exclusive rights in. And whereas with copyright, because every copyright system in the world is joined up, we'll talk more about that this afternoon. If you have copyright protection in Barbados, you have copyright protection basically worldwide, because the local copyright system is locked into all the other copyright systems through global treaties. With trademarks, you have to register your trademark in every single country where you want the protection. So it's something which I would say for a grassroots artist it's not worth thinking about. But you will reach a point, well, first of all, it is worth checking whether or not if you're not performing under your real name, your own name, if you're performing under a stage name, it might be worth checking whether or not that stage name is already being used in music in big markets like the US and Europe. But in terms of actually trademarking, it's not the first thing I would spend money on. Because you have to pay to register your trademarks, you probably also need legal advice on that, and that gets expensive quite quickly. You can get one trademark for the entirety of the European Union. The EU has a trademark registry, which for another few weeks includes the UK. God knows what's going to happen down the line. But as it currently stands, you can get one trademark for the entirety of the EU. And as I say, at the grassroots, trademarks, it's something to be aware of, but not something to worry about. But once you reach a certain level, someone like Beyoncé makes more out of her trademark than anything else that she does. Beyoncé's single biggest product is her perfume. Okay, she makes more money selling perfume than anything else that she does, and that's trademark. Okay, Beyoncé does a deal with a perfume company. She licenses her trademark to the perfume company. They make the perfume. They do all the financial risk. They pay for the marketing. Beyoncé just agrees to allow them to use her name and possibly to appear in an advert, and then she'll get a cut of all the money that is made. And the reason why a Justin Bieber has a perfume is if you can get to that level, it's good money. And that's trademark. So at the top level, actually, music business is a trademark business. But initially, really, it's all about copyright. And by the time you're thinking about trademarks, you will have legal representation, and then the lawyers can help you with getting that sorted. The question is, though, what if somebody infringes your copyright? So you have the exclusive right to make copies of your recording, somebody else makes copies of your recordings. What the law says, sue them. Okay, sue them for damages. But there's a big question there is, well, can you afford to sue them for damages? Also, do they have any money? You don't sue poor people, okay? Because you might win and the court might say, yes, you should have $1 million in damages, but if they haven't got any money, they haven't got any money. So I think with all intellectual property, it's how far will you go to enforce your rights? And yes, and with trademarks, there is the added complication. I mean, big companies like a Cooke have a whole department of people just to manage their trademarks and to look for every trademark application in the world that they think might breach their trademark. So Coca-Cola, someone registers, I don't know, Coca-Cola, and they'll have somebody in their office who will spot that application in India and go and say, no, you can't do that. But that's expensive. It's expensive having all of those people. And so as intellectual property owners, you have to make a decision. At what point does the cost of enforcing your rights cease to be worth it? And there'll always be a point where you have to draw a line. Every record company and music publisher in the world know that there are people infringing their copyrights every day of the week. If it's only bars and cafes playing music without license, and the music industry has to make a decision, where do we draw the line? At what point do we say, do you know what, it's just not worth fighting? Generally, the collecting societies go much further than individual rights owners. One of the advantages of collective licensing is the societies, because they represent lots of rights owners, can go further to enforce rights than individuals can or would. So you have to register the trademark in every country where you want the protection separately. And so that's expensive. And as I say, at a grassroots, it's not something to worry about. But it is worth being aware that the music industry is in the trademark business, and at some point in your career, it becomes worth making that investment. But then you have to make the immediate question is, well, of the 150 countries where I can register trademark, but it's going to cost me X thousand dollars per country to do so, where do I bother? So these are all questions you have to ask. But let's quickly talk through these other two areas of revenue. The good news is that I've got a lot less to say about live performance and the fan relationship because they're much, much simpler to get your head around. And live performance, it is as straightforward as saying, if you can persuade people to pay to be in the room while you sing a song, then you can monetize live performance. And it is as simple as that. And most artists actually start, their first live income is busking. Okay, if people are willing to throw money at you in the street while you perform your music, then you can monetize live performance. Obviously, the aim is that people start to pay to be in the room with you. And most artists have surprisingly similar live careers. So you start off busking, then a bit of open mic, then you start to get your first gig, you start playing bars and cafes, and then you move up to proper music venues, and then you move up to small theatres, and then big theatres, and then arenas, then stadiums. Obviously, a lot of people stop at some point in this hierarchy. But it's as simple as that. That said, there are a couple of asides with live that it's worth mentioning. So first of all, the most obvious way we make money out of live is selling tickets. It's worth mentioning that as well as the ticket price, there are other ways we make money out of tickets. Most ticket companies charge booking fees on top of the ticket price. And those booking fees, they're revenue. They're not a cost of sale. It's not the cost of providing you with the ticket. It's how ticketing companies make money. So the booking fees are part of the business as well. A lot of artists these days, as well as selling tickets through a Ticketmaster or through their own website, also sell some of their tickets on the auction sites. So I don't know which of those have a profile over here, but sites like StubHub or Seatwave or Viagogo. And basically you put them on the auction site and then you sell them to the highest bidder. So you try and get a markup. So you said the ticket was $30, you added a $5 booking fee, and then you sell it on an auction site and actually it goes for $65, $30 markup. And so some artists, not all artists, because some artists think that ticket scalping is wrong and evil and should be stopped, or ticket touting to use the UK term. Other artists say if you can't beat them, join them, and that's how they generate extra revenue from their tickets. The other thing to say about live is that as well as selling tickets, the other way we make money out of live is that once we've got a captive audience in the room, is we sell them stuff, and particularly food and drink. So at a grassroots level, actually, the live music industry makes more selling food and drink than it does selling tickets. So the live industry is in the food and drink business. It's in the business of selling food and drink and other services, cloakroom, parking, to people once they're in the venue to perform their gigs. So the live industry makes money out of ticket sales and all of the add-on fees, and it makes money selling food and drink to the audiences who are in the venue. There's also the corporate gig, which is important for artists. So that's where a company pays you to perform, set fee. So usually it's for something like a company has it as part of a marketing initiative, or they have it as something for their staff, or for corporate hospitality, for sort of investors and media and important people. Some rich people just book big name artists for their parties. And the corporate gig for a lot of artists is an important extra revenue stream. So although live really, the simplest is selling tickets, it's important to remember we're also in the business of selling food and drink, and if you can get into that market, there's the corporate gig revenue too. And as I said at the outset, the thing to remember about live is, eventually, for a lot of artists, it will become the single biggest revenue stream. At the outset, it's a marketing platform. The reason you gig is to build fan base. And I think at the outset, it's important to remember that you're probably not making much money on your gigs. You may be losing money on your gigs, but you need to use those gigs to generate a fan base, to build and connect and engage a fan base. You need to make money. And you need to work out how you're going to make money. But it needs to be authentic. And it needs to be, you need to find a way of getting money out of your fans, but your fans feeling like they've got something in return. And so I think that's the challenge, is who are my fans and what will they think is a good use of their money? So that it's not, although I'm using words like exploit the fan base, I don't mean that in a negative sense. And actually, it's adding value to the fan base. Aside from the fact that you will earn money, the fan will be excited that whatever it is you've sold them, that they now have that. It's about being authentic and finding the right kind of product for your fan base. And finally, the fan relationship. So this is sort of the newest part of the music industry. So the music industry traditionally has been split into two. That side of the industry that deals in intellectual property, so songs, recordings, merchandise. And that part of the music industry that deals in live, so staging gigs, festivals, tours, and all of the other things that sit around live performance. But how about we actually think of the music industry in a different way? We simply think of it as you're an artist, you write some songs, you perform those songs, you excite a fan base, you excite a group of people who now want to be in your fan base. They want to be part of your party. Once you've built a fan base, sell them stuff. And it doesn't matter what you sell them. And I suppose that comes back to that question that's just been asked. You sell them what is appropriate to your fans. You sell them what they want. You work out. And in the olden days, it would be we build a fan base and then we try and sell them CDs and we try and sell them tickets and we might try and sell them T-shirts. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, we give up and we say this artist doesn't work. Whereas I think now we are starting to say, well, hang on a second, okay, they won't buy CDs, perhaps they won't buy tickets, perhaps they won't buy T-shirts. Well, what will they buy? You know, if we've got 5,000 really engaged people, what will they buy? And so we learn what they will buy. It's finding something that they're excited about that is relevant to you. So I know at the conference that I organised in Brighton in May, one of the examples given was some of the hip-hop artists have a big fan base in the skateboarding community. And so they've built a whole separate revenue stream by selling skateboards and skateboard-related kit, because that community were never going to buy records. They weren't necessarily going to buy tickets to shows, but they're fanatical about skateboarding. And they are, in their minds, in your fans' minds, they're equating your music to their other passion of skateboarding. Well, let's tap into that. And let's build a business that enables them to spend money on what their passion is, and the connection being the music. And this is easier to do today than it was previously because of the web. And for me, the single biggest impact that the web and the net has had on music isn't iTunes, it isn't Spotify, it isn't YouTube. It's the fact that artists now have a direct connection to core fan base, okay? To those fans who want to talk and listen and engage with an artist on a day-by-day basis. And it used to be, in the olden days, so 20 years ago, 15 years ago, artists didn't know who their fans were. Okay, artists didn't, beyond the mosh pit and the fan letter, artists didn't know who their fans were. Record companies didn't know who the fans were. Promoters didn't know who the fans were. The only people who knew who the fans were record shops, and they were very bad at documenting that information, and ticketing companies, who were very good at documenting that information, hence the power of a Ticketmaster in 2016. In the internet age, you can know who core fan base is. Not all of your fans, because not all of your fans will want to connect with you. So some fans just want a new record every 2 years. But core fan base you can now connect to online, which means you can learn and analyze about that fan base, and you can then sell products directly to that fan base. And that direct-to-fan relationship is new and it's exciting. And the music industry is only just learning about the potential of that, both from a data perspective, learning about your artists, and from a commercial perspective, selling to those artists. And labels are getting into this, promoters are getting into this, and managers are getting into this. But just to conclude, the three main areas of revenue that artists have open to them is intellectual property, so songs, recordings, artwork, trademarks. Live performance, so the selling of tickets, and then once you have people in the room, food, drink, and whatever else. And then the fan relationship, okay? Building a fan base, working out what gets them excited, and then selling them the products and services that they want and will spend money on. And it's true for all artists that those are the core revenue streams. Now, obviously, for some artists, IP is the biggest part of what they do. For other artists, live is the biggest part of what they do. For some new artists, actually, the fan relationship element is becoming the most important thing of what they do. But most artists who are writing songs, recording songs, who have artwork and photography around them, artists who have live performance, and artists who therefore build a fan base are actually operating in all of those different different areas. And as we've sort of alluded to in the questions here, one of the challenges for new artists and managers of new artists is there's only so many hours in the day. Okay, we're all short on time. And so it's working out, well, of all these different things, what do I prioritize? And I can give you some basics on, well, you should definitely do this and you should definitely do this. But you will always reach a point where you then have to start making decisions. And that's running a business. You know, I run a media and consultancy business, and we're exactly the same. You know, we have a list of about 25 things that we have been talking about doing to grow our business for the last 10 years. And of those 25 things, about 20 of them we have never got to. And the constant challenge every month is, of this list of things that we think will grow our business, you know, what are we going to prioritize? Where are we going to invest our time? And artists are the same. You'll have a big long list of, oh, we could do this, we could do this, we could do this. But you've got to work out, where do we invest the time? Bearing in mind that as artists, you need to invest some time in writing great songs, learning to perform them, and getting out there and playing shows. So everything that I'm talking about here today is on top of your work as a creator and as a performer. So one of the challenges is working out where you invest your time. Which brings us to the music industry, because obviously what artists are trying to do, at the start, you're spinning lots of plates, and you're trying to keep them all spinning, because you and possibly a manager are trying to basically run your entire business. But what artists do is, as their career progresses, is they look to do deals with business partners. And the idea of that is to basically give up chunks of the work to a business partner, and hopefully to get some time and possibly cash investment in return, to enable you to start tapping into these different revenue streams to reach a bigger audience and to drive more revenue. And so that's what the music industry is. The music industry are people and companies who help artists access and develop and hone their different revenue streams. And most music people and most music companies specialize in one of our revenue streams. So you can split the music industry up into three. There's the music rights industry, which creates and exploits intellectual property. There is the live industry that stages live performance. And then there is the much, much newer direct-to-fan industry that is slowly emerging, which helps artists build and monetize their fan base. So let's quickly talk through each of those strands of the music industry in turn. And I can tell you what kinds of companies we find in Europe and North America, and then it'll be interesting to get back from you at the end of this session whether or not all of these exist in one form or another in this part of the world, or whether actually some of the companies that have emerged in, say, the US market or the UK market are yet to properly emerge here, and then we have to decide whether or not that's something that you as a music community should be looking to address. So let's start off with what I call the music rights industry first. So these are the companies that deal in intellectual property. They help artists create work and then monetize that work. And I suppose the two big business partners in music rights are the music publisher and the record label. The music publisher monetizes songs, and the record label monetizes recordings. Okay? So if you're a singer-songwriter and you're creating songs over here and recordings over here, traditionally you would work with two separate business partners, a music publisher on your songs and a record company on your recordings. Some artists work with one company on both, but that is generally the exception rather than the norm. The three biggest record companies in the world are Sony Music, Universal Music, and Warner Music. The three biggest music publishers in the world are Universal Music Publishing, Sony ATV Music Publishing, and Warner Chappell Music Publishing. So the three big music rights companies are both record companies and publishers. However, as an artist, traditionally, if you did a record deal with Sony, you wouldn't do a publishing deal with Sony ATV. You would do a publishing deal with Universal or Warner or one of the independents. So best practice traditionally was your publishing deal and your label deal are separate. Some independents seek to work with artists on both sets of copyright. And smaller independents would say it's the only way they can afford to make an investment, because if they're going to invest money and time and marketing, then they have to be able to earn from both sets of rights. It's particularly common in sort of production dance music, EDM-led music, where actually the songwriting process and the recording process are sort of the same thing, versus a sort of music where you write the songs over here one day and then you record them the next day, and they're very much separate of what you do. But crucially, the music rights industry can be split into two. The publishers over here dealing with song copyright, and the record companies over here dealing with recording copyright. We call them publishers because 100 years ago, you made money out of song copyright by publishing sheet music. Okay, how do you make money out of songs? You put the lyrics and the musical score into a book, you print the book, and you publish it. So that's why we call the people who deal in song copyrights publishers. Even though these days, sheet music is a tiny, tiny part of how music publishers make money. Then we have the other people involved in music rights. So we have distributors and rights administration companies. Now, most labels are also distributors, and most publishers are also rights administrators. But there are also companies who just do distribution, and there are also companies who just do rights administration, so administrating usually song copyrights. The reason for that is smaller labels and smaller publishers don't necessarily have distribution and rights administration skills in-house, certainly not on a global level. So they look to independent distributors and independent rights administrators to do that work for them. However, some distributors and some rights administration companies work for artists direct. And this is actually becoming more common, particularly for established artists. If you don't need a record company to invest money, and you don't need a music publisher to pay you in advance. Now, most new artists, that is exactly what you need. But if you're a more established artist and you don't need those things, then rather than doing a publishing deal, which will usually involve giving up your copyright, and rather than doing a record deal, which will usually involve giving up your copyright, keep the copyright and do a distribution deal to get your music out there through a label, and a rights administration deal to get your rights administrated by people who know what they're doing. They'll take a cut, they'll still take a cut of your revenue, but you can keep ownership of the copyright. And we'll talk more about these services deals or licensing deals that are becoming more common, particularly for established artists, when we look at deals this afternoon. In terms of other companies involved in music rights, obviously there are the retailers, so the record shops and the mail order sites like Amazon. There's also DSPs. DSPs is short for digital service provider, so that's basically any digital music platform. So it would include iTunes, it would include Pandora, it would include YouTube, it would include SoundCloud, all of the companies that are distributing digital music, whether they're doing so as downloads or streams or something in between. Then we have the PR and marketing companies, we have the collecting societies that we're going to talk more about this afternoon, and then on the visual trademark side, the merchandisers. So there are companies who specialize in doing the merchandise side. And sometimes that's actually making the merchandise, sometimes it's outsourcing. So it's doing the creative, working out what to sell, and then going to other companies to actually create the product. Merchandisers also sometimes get involved in doing those perfume deals I talked about, or deals with beer companies or mobile companies to create products around their brand. So all of these companies are involved in exploiting the intellectual property created by artists. Just as a quick aside, sitting there in the middle of the music rights industry is the record industry. So a lot of people think that the music industry and the record industry is the same thing. It's not. The record industry isn't even the music rights industry. The record industry is that part of the music industry that creates and exploits, markets and distributes sound recordings, recorded music. The record industry often has a higher profile than a lot of the rest of the music industry, partly because in the olden days of CDs and vinyl, their logos were always printed on the middle of the record, so we got to know the names of the record companies in a way that we never heard of the music publishers or the merchandisers. Also, as we'll talk about this afternoon, for new artists, it's often the label who put in the initial cash investment. Okay? Other people are investing time, agents, managers, promoters, but it is the label who puts the money on the table. So I think that's one of the reasons why the record company has a sort of a higher profile, the record industry, than the music industry at large. But it is worth remembering that the record industry is the part of the music rights industry that creates and monetizes sound recordings. And of course, within the record industry, we would throw in the studios and the producers and the engineers and the companies that actually press the vinyl and the CD and whatever other physical formats you may still be buying. So that's the IP industry, the music rights industry.